Thank you all for coming. About ready to get started. For those who don't know me, I'm Matt Flynn. I'm the manager of the planning division for the city of Davenport. I know a lot of the faces here, and we appreciate you coming out tonight. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this project, but it is nice having a zoning meeting where we don't have a room full of angry people because of a specific proposal. So we're kind of going to try and hit the reset button on our code, and I'm going to let our folks from Camiros take us through the process. Barista Strungus and Chris Jeanette, they're with the firm Camiros from Chicago. They were selected and awarded a contract by the city council, responding to an RFP to, in essence, rewrite the city's zoning code. And if anybody can make zoning exciting, it's these two. So I'm going to turn it over to Arista right now. And again, thanks for coming.
Well, high expectations. This will be good. Thank you all for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it. And as Matt said, some of our introduction for us already. We are from Camiros. We're the firm hired to do the zoning ordinance update. And today's meeting is really just an introduction to the project. We don't have any approaches. We don't have any ideas about where we're going with this yet. We're really just been gathering information and trying to understand what's going on. So we just wanted to take a little time to introduce ourselves to you, introduce you to the process, and tell you a little bit about what we've been seeing. So at this point, there is no reason for anybody to be angry. There'll be plenty more public meetings where you can come yell at Chris and myself. So this is the agenda: introduce ourselves, introduce zoning, just to kind of clarify what we're here for. Do an overview of the project, and then if you have any questions or comments you'd like us to know, we have some time for that at the end of the meeting. So this is me, and this is Chris Jeanette, and he'll be speaking at the end of the presentation. We are from Camiros. The firm's been around for about 40 years. I've been there about 18 years. I'm the zoning specialist and a principal and partner in the firm. I've been doing zoning ordinances across the country for many years now, and if I do the math, you'll figure out how old I am, and I don't want to do that just yet. Joining me is Chris. Chris has been with us for about 6 years now. Chris and I have worked on a lot of zoning projects together, and we have a really good working relationship in terms of that. He's trained as a landscape architect, but also does planning, zoning, urban design, and you'll be seeing us at all the public meetings that are here. We're basically the faces of the project. There's others back in the firm who would help us out, but we don't let them leave the office. We keep them chained there and doing work and graphics. So. Camiros, we are a national practice. We also are multidisciplinary. While you have kind of the zoning team here, there's others in the office experienced in downtown planning, corridor planning, neighborhood planning. We do a wide range of things, comprehensive plans as well. We think this gives us a unique kind of perspective on zoning because we understand the relationships between those types of plans and policies and how they relate to zoning and what you can and can't do and implement that way. So we bring that background with us as well. We worked all across the country. All the states you see shaded there in blue is where we've done projects, not necessarily zoning. Some may be more planning-oriented projects, but we've got kind of a real broad base of best practices and national experience to bring to this project. This is just kind of a smattering of some of the more recent zoning projects we've done. A lot of these I've worked on. Chris has worked on a number as well. We've recently had ordinances adopted in Buffalo, New York, New Orleans, Louisiana, Baltimore, Maryland. These are some of the bigger ones. But being located in Chicago, we do work with a number of towns, many the size of Davenport, many even smaller, a lot of the suburbs, even worked out in Council Bluffs, Iowa. So we've got that kind of, we're not just big city. We work in many smaller areas, both rural and urban. So we bring that kind of cross type of experience to the project. One of the things that you'll find out about us, and I know that we've spoken with some of you when we were doing stakeholder meetings, is that we're not dogmatic. We're not going to come up here and tell you that the newest thing in zoning, whether it be form-based coding or performance-based zoning, is the thing that's going to solve all your problems. We work from the perspective of, we want to know what your problems are, we want to know what your land use policies are, and what is the best approach to solving that or implementing that. So where we come from is, let's figure out what's going on first, and then we'll use the full range of techniques that we have available to solve it best. So you'll end up with an ordinance that's kind of got a lot of different techniques going on, but it's very specific to the issues that are here in Davenport. So one of the things, just to kind of very quickly clarify, we are doing the zoning ordinance, and a lot of times when people think of zoning, they think of it as fixing everything, and unfortunately we can't fix everything. So just kind of want to do a quick primer on what zoning can and can't do. What is zoning? It's the use and development of private property, basically kind of giving you your yards, your setbacks, your heights, what kind of uses are allowed in different districts and different parts of the city, looking at the different aspects of site development, things like accessory structures, parking, landscape, signs, really addressing all those things, everything else aside from the principal building, and establishing the administrative processes that go on. What does it not do? Zoning is not the rules for dividing up land into lots. That's subdivision, and we're not addressing that in this project. Zoning doesn't control ownership, it doesn't control how businesses operate, and it doesn't set the standards for public improvement. So really what we're looking at is the use and physical development of private property in the city. So why are we here? Some of you who've worked with the ordinance probably don't even need this slide and you know why we're here. Others may be wondering how this project got started. From what we're looking at it, and what we see is that you've got a very old ordinance, and a lot of times you start making amendments to that to address situations that come up, and it ends up being like a Band-Aid over a bullet wound. You're not solving anything, you're still making more districts. When I first looked at your ordinance, I was shocked at the amount of districts that you've got. It's just really trying to solve problems by creating more and more processes. So that what we want to do is really look at how do we make the districts relate to the character that's here, both what's established kind of in the kind of original older part of the city and then what's going on in the areas where it's growing. We want to look at incorporating modern zoning techniques because that's not really integrated into the ordinance right now. A lot of things need interpretation, a lot of things need negotiation. Any development that comes in really can't seem to just be built on the lot that it owns. It has to go through special processes. We want to try and clarify that and kind of move away from that, allowing development to come in. It creates a predictable environment. In that case, I know what I can do with my property and I know what my neighbor will do with their property. It creates a much better, more predictable environment. What we see in our role with this project, we want to collaborate with staff, and we want to collaborate with you, the public, as well as the various boards and commissions. What we see is we want to work with everybody. We'll help you understand what zoning can do, and you help us understand what we needed to do, what you needed to do for Davenport. We want to incorporate best practices. We want to create a predictable and consistent ordinance, again, that I know what I can do and I know what my neighbor can do. We want to preserve what's unique about Davenport as well as its history and its character. And we want to establish the correct standards for redevelopment and infill, as well as new development. Okay, without a microphone, I have to keep yelling, so bear with me. So how do we do this? What we're going to do is go through a three-phase project. The first is this task that we're in right now, task one, phase one, where we're getting reconnaissance, we're talking to different people, we're driving around, studying the city, really looking at different things, and then we're going to come out with a technical report that summarizes what's going on. In that technical report, we'll bring it back to you. You will let us know if we're headed in the right direction. Following that, we start to prepare drafts. We do a number of them. We do one for staff to make sure we're doing it right. We do another one that we do with the Zoning Advisory Committee. And then we do a third that we will bring back to you in a public open house format. And then finally, the shortest one, but the hardest one, how do we get it adopted? We create a public hearing. It goes before a public hearing before the P&Z. And then it goes through the adoption process. And all of this takes place in 18 months, fingers crossed. But I've worked in bigger cities that have done it in 14, so it is possible. And as you can see here, we are sitting at this stage, the public town hall. So we just really started this process. So you see as this goes on, this will be available, you can look this up online, showing kind of how we move forward. Again, doing things with the Zoning Advisory Committee, which we don't know the composition of that yet, bringing back things to you through a public workshop format, so we finally get to an ordinance that's been vetted by everybody in the city. So a couple of things to notice. We do a project brand, and this is the project brand for this project, the Davenport Zoning Ordinance Rewrite. You see it here in color and in black and white, depending on how many copies of something we're going to have to make. So this will be identifying everything that comes out of this process. You'll see this on all the documents. It'll be really clear that this is affiliated with what's going on in this project. And at the end of the presentation, we will tell you where to go for this, but there will be a website. And this is the homepage that you will see. Everything will be up here. This PowerPoint will be up there. You'll be able to comment. You'll be able to review documents. You'll be able to download them. And then basically you can enter in your email address, and with that you'll get an update every time the site is updated with something or a public meeting. So we encourage you to give us your email so you can join that list. And then finally you'll see things like this later on in the process. This is something we call the community open house. We do banners and stations like this. In this regard, you basically would be able to walk around, we'd be in a room like this, they'd be set up in different corners, and you can come and talk to us about your issue related to that section of the ordinance. So this is kind of what the display looks like. This is what we hope to have when we actually bring this out. This is from another community, and this is one of the open houses. And as you can see, I actually found a picture with Chris in it that shows people talking to him. He's a nice guy. You'll be able to come up to him and yell at him about things you don't like in the ordinance. The stuff you like, you come to me. He's your target when you're unhappy. And then we do public workshops where we found a very unflattering picture of myself. And then we do these workshops where we come, we do presentations, and again, things like this. So there'll be a number of ways for you to enter the process, talk to us, let us know your issues and concerns. We're not one size fits all. We do a variety of different types of meetings. So what are we kind of looking at? Where are we starting from? Well, we know where we're starting from is comprehensive plan that you adopted. Those are your land use principles and policies that you've put into place. It's important to remember zoning doesn't implement everything that's in the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan addresses a number of different things, some of which can't be done through zoning. So what we've done is kind of looked at it, and we see a number of the issues popping up again and again. Things like preserving the character, especially of established neighborhoods. Ways to look at how to grow when you're looking up in the north and the east, and what do we do with that area, how the districts relate to that. Looking at diverse and affordable housing types. Looking at the quality of new development and maintaining downtown's prominence in the city. How do we further reinforce what you've got going on in downtown through the zoning standards? As well as things like preserving natural resources, most of which have to do with water for some reason. And really looking at kind of how we make the riverfront active, how we control flooding, stormwater management. So there's a variety of principles that we can pull from the comprehensive plan and help you to implement them. Again, can't do it all, but we can help set the stage for many of these issues. I also looked at your zoning ordinance. And you got a lot of districts. And you got a lot of stuff in there, but you're missing a lot of stuff as well. And this is just, and what I'm saying, and in these observations I'm making right now, this is just coming from an outsider's perspective, just looking at the ordinance and kind of seeing how it functions based on other newer ordinances and the way they are organized. Things aren't in the right places, or things repeatedly between districts. Need to kind of compartmentalize stuff and make it logical in its organization. You need some pictures. There's no graphics in there really, so we need something that people can visually look at and understand what's going on in the ordinance. The definitions are kind of all over the place. Some terms are defined, some terms aren't. It's an issue that pops up in a lot of ordinances. And then finally, modernizing the use structure. It's really the ideas of let's tailor the uses that we want to allow in the districts to the districts. So it's not the B3 allows everything in the B2 plus these uses, and now all of a sudden you add something in the B2 that you don't want in the B3, but you didn't know you just did that. So it's really the idea of let's tailor the uses to each of the districts so that I know if I'm living next door to this piece of land, I know exactly what it can be used for. Also looking at kind of creating standards for it, doing a more general use approach so you don't have to spell out all the specific types of uses you want, and really kind of identifying and modernizing the way you approach uses. Again, creating measurement standards I think is important so that building height is always measured the same way, lot area is always measured the same way, rather than creating special categories for that. Let's just do one section of the ordinance that lays all of that out. Let's look at, site development standards. We heard a lot about the landscape ordinance and how nobody really likes it. So we want to fix that and create comprehensive, easy to administer landscaping. Looking at sign standards, you see there it says Reed versus Gilbert. It's a recent decision. Well, it's not a recent anymore, but it came from the Supreme Court regarding content neutrality. We got to make sure that we match that. And looking at parking flexibilities. And then, other things that we're looking at, updating accessory uses and structures. We know you already did chickens. We'll just be taking what you did with chickens and moving that into the ordinance. and updating to how? I'm moving the slides, how does it go dead? And so I know what the next slide is, so while we see what happens here. Oh, perfect, thank you. Finally, it's kind of understanding the directions that it's going. It's really looking at the zoning district structure. Again, you're kind of making districts to fix problems from our perspective when they come up. So it's the idea of let's make districts that relate to their places. You've got the urban, recently developed, urban, kind of old school development that you want to make sure that you preserve in districts suited to that. And then districts that are suited to the more suburban new growth areas as well. Moving away from overlays and creating base districts. If we have to create more base districts, that's not a bad thing. It's the idea is, and then I don't have to look in 2 different places in the ordinance to figure out what's going on. Defining each district, bringing in new mixed-use districts, as the plan talks about as well, and also things reducing nonconformities. Again, we're not going to get all of them, but we want to try to bring in as many of those as possible. And so with this, since you've heard me kind of hoarsely yelling at you for about 15 minutes, Chris is going to come up and talk about some of what we've heard in our interviews. Thanks.
All right, so as Arista mentioned, we were here just a few weeks ago. I spoke to a bunch of you that I see out in the crowd, just having preliminary discussions about what some of the issues with the current ordinance are and what we should really be focusing on as we move forward. So what you'll see on these slides are just general comments. These aren't any observations of ours per se. They're what we've heard based on our initial conversation. So you might see things in here that are contradictory. Everything's paraphrased. That's all intentional. It's intended to be kind of a broad overview of what we heard. That said, I have about 20 slides that are all bullet points, just like this. So if anyone wants to get a snack or like settle into your chair, now's the time. Nobody looks terrified. There aren't that 20. There aren't that many slides.
He doesn't know I changed the PowerPoint.
So, in general, the very first thing and the most prominent thing is that people want an ordinance that's clear and consistent in its application. As Arista was saying, if I own a piece of property in Davenport, I need to know what I can do with that piece of property. I need to know what my neighbors can do with their property. I need to know what the guy down the block who owns the corner store can do with that property. That type of predictability is really important for the health and for the economic development of a community like Davenport. So that's pretty much the primary concern that we heard. We heard from a lot of folks that more development should be allowed by right without the need to go through numerous special approval processes. On the same hand, we also heard from a number of folks who want to make sure that we maintain the strong presence of community input in any of these processes as we move forward, and that the community has a voice whenever things are happening in their neighborhood or nearby them. And then finally, we want to ensure that the ordinance takes a proactive approach rather than a reactive approach. Arista mentioned there's sort of this reactionary thing that's been happening where an issue comes up and the ordinance will get amended or a district will get added on. And as things happen, these band-aids get put on the ordinance. And after a while, when you've got an ordinance like Davenport's, which I think a lot of it dates back to the late 70s, early 80s, it really becomes kind of a non-functional document. So we want to build in a series of standards and regulations that really allow us to address change proactively instead of reactively as new things come up. In terms of land use policies, the first one here is really just looking back at the comprehensive plan or the land use plan and making sure that what we do in the zoning links up with the adopted policies of the land use plan. And Arista went over a lot of those already, but they also include things such as encouraging multimodal development, making sure that we're accommodating things like bike parking and walkability standards so that people can get places without bringing a car with them. Thinking about how we use design and form and thinking about things like height to really create these walkable urban environments where they're appropriate within the city. Doing things like forward-thinking rezonings related to the recommendations and the vision established in the comp plan. So thinking about areas that are designated for a certain type of commercial, how can we see them change to that type of commercial in the future? Likewise, how can we strengthen areas that we want to make sure that no change really occurs? And other things like looking at the downtown boundaries, exactly how we're going to map downtown, areas that have significant impact, what exactly are their boundaries, and how do we do things like encourage a more active riverfront environment in the city. In terms of the process, the number one thing we heard was that it should be streamlined. A lot of folks feel right now that current processes sometimes take too long, specifically rezonings. and that rezonings may be too closely tied to specific development or redevelopment projects. And again, it's this idea that more things should happen in a predictable manner. Rezoning shouldn't necessarily happen in response to your project, but rezoning should happen in a proactive way where we've decided that a particular part of the city is desirable for a certain district, and not in reaction to a particular project. Sign approvals need to be clarified in terms of exactly what I can have and how I go about getting it. We've heard from multiple people that there's a lot of confusion in terms of the process and the timeline of the process. Thinking about ways to avoid problems like demolition by neglect, which is something that we've heard people are concerned about. We want to make sure that we're evaluating all the tools at our disposal as we go through and rewrite the zoning regulations to consider ways to avoid problems like demolition by neglect. And then finally, PUD shouldn't be the standard for new development. It should not be the default way to get things done in Davenport. A lot of times in communities when you see a lot of PUD planned development coming in, it indicates that there's something in the ordinance that's broken or that's not really accommodating the type of development that the city wants to see. And that kind of stuff can't happen by right, so it gets sort of shuffled off into the side process, which is really, that's not what PUD is designed to do. PUD is designed for a specific type of innovative development. So we want to make sure that we're aligning the new standards in the new districts so that more things can happen not by PUD. In terms of the zoning districts, really three main kind of groups of districts that we're thinking about looking at here, or that we've heard about so far. First with the downtown, how do we think about things like design, aesthetics, height, to really maintain the form of Davenport's downtown, which is a great downtown. And how do we think about things like maintaining flexibility in a use structure that can allow the growth that we're seeing in downtown and sort of the lively mix of businesses that are coming in to stay there and to actually encourage that growth to come back into the downtown. Second to that, sort of the neighborhoods that are the next ring out, where they're the more densely built out part of the city. How do we think about things like infill in terms of design and appropriate uses for these types of places? Related to that, how do we encourage easy adaptive reuse of some of the structures, these great historic structures that are located in some of these closer in neighborhoods? A good example of that is the corner store typology. Are there ways that we can work to get some of these historic corner stores back operating in ways that are complementary to the residential neighborhoods around them? And then finally, some of the further out areas toward the north and the east parts of the city where we're seeing significant portions of growth, a lot more open land. How do we build in standards and districts that really accommodate those areas as well? In terms of development standards, as Marissa said, nobody likes the landscape ordinance, which is kind of, it's a pain for me because I'm a landscape architect by training, so I'm hoping to fix that. We'll see how I do. People find it a little bit onerous, both in terms of trying to figure out what's required and to figure out how to provide what the city wants to see. As a result of that, the types of landscape that you're seeing might not be exactly what you want. Too much off-street parking might be required in certain areas is something that we've heard. How do we deal with areas where no parking has ever been required and suddenly we're asking for 20 spaces? Similarly, we might want to reconsider areas where parking, the sea of parking might not be necessary in front of a building. So evaluating all of those types of situations and making sure that we calibrate the parking that's required appropriately to the areas that we're thinking about. Again, sign standards need to be updated. The example that you see here is there's a real need to address electronic message signs. This is something that came up repeatedly. How many can you have? How big can they be? How bright can they be? Can they flash at you? All of those things need to be addressed through this process as well. Updating some common site development standards, such as exterior lighting, parking pads. What do we do with residential outdoor storage? And how do we deal with home occupations in the city? We've heard about issues with things like illegal car repair. We want to make sure that we're dealing with home occupations in a way that's both fair to the people who want to have these businesses and also fair to their neighbors. We want to think about things like accessory structures, defining a broad range of accessory structures. What are all of these things? How big can they be? Where can they go on a lot? And similarly, what's a temporary accessory structure and what's a permanent accessory structure? Should be based on some sort of length of time. If I've got a temporary accessory structure that I've had up there for 10 years, is that really still a temporary accessory structure? So clarifying things like this in the ordinance are really important. Thinking about connectivity in terms of new development, both as a public safety issue, ingress and egress, and also as it relates to a lot of the principles in the comp plan related to multimodality and walkability in neighborhoods and commercial areas. And then finally, environmental. As Arista said, Davenport's a river city, always has been, always will be. It's also a city that's got a lot of topography, so you put those two things together and you got runoff issues dealing with stormwater. So how do we do that and build it into the development regulations in a way that's responsible, that accomplishes what we want it to do, but that isn't overly onerous for people as they're going through and trying to get development done here. We really want to reinforce the river as a key amenity in the city. Things like considering a natural resources overlay zone might be appropriate where there's something that we want to preserve or protect in the city. And we want to also think about integrating sustainable development techniques into the ordinance, whether it's things like encouraging leadership in energy and environmental design type standards, or allowing for sustainable building materials such as permeable or pervious paving. Those are also important things to build into the ordinance. Finally, development and fill in the floodplain is something that needs to get considered as part of this process, and we want to make sure that we're encouraging low impact development through these new development regulations where that's appropriate as well. So that's the big long list. It wasn't that bad. And finally, the project website is www.davenportzoning.com. Excuse me. As we draft and release public versions of documents, you'll find them up there. You'll find meeting announcements there. You'll see in the bottom left-hand corner, it's a little bit grayed out here, but there's a sign up for updates.
Oh, I was going to help you out.
Okay.
There we go.
Good. Sign up for updates. Enter in your email address anytime we post a meeting announcement or a new project document. We'll announce it on here. You don't have to worry about following it. It'll come right into your inbox. And so we encourage all you guys to do that, as well as to leave us comments. Add to that long list of things that I just read. We're happy to have them. So, and with that.
Oh, you're not going to know what I'm emotional. I was going to say, this PowerPoint, this will go live either tonight or tomorrow morning, and then tomorrow we'll be posting this whole PowerPoint if you wanted to look at it on the site. So, yeah, you never would have got what I was. Okay.
So with that, any comments or questions from you guys?
Yes, ma'am.
So the next public meeting will be when?
We're not sure. Right now we have to go back and start writing up the technical report. I would hope it would be in May. That's our timeline right now. So barring anything unforeseen happening, that would be the next public meeting. And at that meeting you will have something to react to because we'll release that report to you in advance of the meeting.
Yeah, I'll mention that one of the next tasks for staff to do will be to do some recruitment of a zoning advisory committee. We have not made any selections to that, to be formed body that will, I don't think will be overly burdensome in terms of the amount of work that we're going to be asking you to do, but people that will have an interest in just kind of keeping closer tabs on this process. And if you're interested, send me an email or give me a call, or you may hear from me one way or another. But I suspect people in this room will be on the zoning advisory committee. Close the door.
I just had a question, just out of interest. I know you've done a lot of zoning ordinances throughout the country. Is there another city that you think is kind of similar to Davenport in the ordinance you started with? And just if we wanted to look at some other city and what you had done, where should we look?
For the most part, a lot of the ordinances we've done are very different from each other. So I would say to find examples of our work, well, you can go to our website, which will lead you to cities where we've worked, which you can then go to their web pages and download documents. So if you go to camiros.com, CAMIROS.com, you'll see all the different projects we've worked on, and you can just kind of follow those links off to other sites. But recent ones are, I would say, to look at the Buffalo Code, Buffalo, New York, And New Orleans, Louisiana, that one's recently adopted. Providence, Rhode Island. I think Providence might be closer. It's bigger than you guys, but it's a river city as well. So Providence, Rhode Island might be one of the ones to look at that would be. And just to kind of speak to that point a little bit, every city's different, and I just want to make it very clear that we don't have an ordinance at home that we go back to the office, do a find and replace, and insert City of Davenport instead of whatever blank it was. Everything ends up getting crafted, individually. I will say the problems with the current ordinance are not unique. This is every place that I've worked that's had an ordinance that has a lot of age on it. They've found unique ways to mess it up, but it's all still the same kind of issues that are going on in different ways.
Thank you. I'm going to look at Providence.
Okay. Sir?
You referenced modern zoning techniques. Would you elaborate on what that phrase means?
Well, a lot of them, some of them are fairly quite simple. Probably the simplest modern zoning technique is going to a generic use approach and putting it in a use matrix as opposed to listing out districts and then tailoring the districts to it. So people have really gravitated toward this type of use approach. So instead of saying bookstore, shoe store, record store, you say retail goods establishment. You only pull out specific uses that you know are problematic. So that's kind of one very simple modern technique that most ordinances go to. If you want to end up on the kind of more complex scale, it's things like I mentioned, probably the most prominent is something called form-based coding, which is less concerned with how things are used and more concerned with the form of buildings and their relationship both to each other as well as to the public realm. And that gets very specific into design. At times it can go, the work we did in Buffalo is a full form-based code. And that gets down to building typologies and basically allowances for that. There's ways to pull the good parts of form-based coding into other ordinances without going full-blown the way that Buffalo, New York did. That approach is appropriate for them, and they've been setting that groundwork for many years to do that. Here we imagine we'll just be pulling good bits and pieces of that technique and bringing it in.
I'm not sure what level of detail this meeting is intended for, but I'm just kind of curious, because of the age of the current zoning for Davenport in particular, will we have or do we have significant grandfathering issues and challenges moving forward?
No, you're like everybody else in that regard. Whatever's here is legally here is grandfathered in. So what we would do is clarify the rules for those existing. Now, our intent is to try to get rid of everything, not get rid of, but our intent is to make, if there's a certain kind of, corner stores are a good example, and I've dealt with this in a lot of kind of northeastern cities. They have them there and they've made them non-conforming, but they're still there. And we've done provisions that allow them to reopen under very kind of limited circumstances, so they're very low impact to the neighborhood, like they don't sell alcohol, but they could be a grocery store kind of thing, and make them conforming. So our goal is that if you've got something in the city that has become non-conforming, but it's all over the place, we want to make it conforming so that it doesn't have to deal with that. But we can't get everything. You just can't. And in particular in a city that's old like this, which is great, you're going to have some weird stuff that you're never going to be able to address. And in which case that would be grandfathered, and we would set out the rules for non-conforming structures, non-conforming uses, what you can do with those, how those would work, so that it's really clear that it can continue, but it's subject to these standards.
And I will say too, one of our primary goals in every ordinance is to make sure that we're reducing the number of nonconformities or minimizing the number of nonconformities that we create. A good example is looking at residential districts. Oftentimes with an older ordinance, you'll see the sort of older, more densely developed parts of town often will have lots and structures that become non-conforming because a more suburban type of zoning was superimposed on top of them, in the 70s, 80s. So part of our analysis is going through and actually looking at the lot development patterns on the ground and making sure that we recalibrate things like residential districts and we actually pull a lot of that stuff out of non-conforming status.
I noticed you put the slide with your picture on it and back of
I just tried to restore it.
Ego! Any other questions? All right, like I said, this is the, oh, sorry, ma'am.
Is there a place we can go to follow up on Barb's? Is there a place we can go that explains some of those modern techniques and, that you can guide the group to?
like zoning, new zoning approaches, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's really kind of doing Google's, I mean, I can't think of it, but the
If I
planning.
can interject here, I think that's a great suggestion. And I think we can, and you know, of course, there's a lot of sites out there from, you know, CNU and
APA,
you name it.
yeah.
Maybe we can put together a short bibliography and include it on the website. We'll talk about it, but I mean, we have those lists currently, and we'd be happy to share them or talk with you directly, and depending on what kind of specific questions you have, but
We also think we may have put something together for another project that explains this, but we can't really remember that, so sometime in the car ride home tomorrow, we'll scream it at each other,
I told her
and
not
then
to
we can.
tell you.
Right. So if we can find that, we'll put that up as well.
and I'm not implying anything, but I think there's a Zoning for Dummies book. I honestly do.
I believe there is.
I think there is.
I think there is. I saw you first and then I'll come back.
I live in a neighborhood that has like 15 white houses, and there's one house that's kind of off and a little bit away from the others, and it's white. And I was wondering, well, what would you think of, I mean, something non-conforming that would maybe remain white, but have an interesting, unique aspect about it? How can you work that in? Let's say I want to put a one-room schoolhouse there to add to the character of the neighborhood, to give it some kind of, is that something that would be difficult to zone, you know, and have a small parking lot, maybe a community center or something like that?
I mean, it depends. It's not an easy question to answer because it depends on what the uses end up being in the different districts. Like if you're in a residential neighborhood, you may have some allowances for certain types of institutional uses. A lot of times, I'm not saying anything about Davenport right now, but just in other cases I've worked, you know, a residential district will allow churches and community centers and, you know, park facilities. So it's just something, if it's allowed in the district, they can place it in the district. So it would really just depend on kind of what's in there. And at this point, we don't have any answers to that yet. There's some, sir?
You've kind of touched on this already, but I'm just curious, as a native Davenporter, you all have a national perspective. How different are we? How unique are we? How broken are we? How big a problem are we here to bring things up to standard? I mean, are we much different than any other community that you've dealt with?
In terms of kind of, you know, writing a new zoning ordinance, no. You're kind of you're basically at the same level as everybody else was for an ordinance of your age right now. And for a city, you know, we do work a lot in the Midwest, so it's kind of a fairly common issue. What you have that is an asset, which is great, is you've got your downtown and you've got the neighborhoods surrounding the downtown, and there's a very specific character there. So a lot of times if we go into communities, we work a lot with suburbs too. You go in there, they're new. You know, we're working in a community in way outside of Chicago, I don't even want to call it a suburb, that is, what, how old is 7 years old?
Yes.
7 years old. They built a town center and there's a bunch of houses. What do we do? You know, so the idea that we've got a fabric already in place gives us an advantage to know we don't have to develop a character for you. You've got one, and you've got an amenity like the river. So I mean, so bringing those two things together, you know, makes it easy for us to know what to build off of. So in that sense, you're in a very good position. In terms of what the ordinance is like now and what we have ahead of us, it's nothing that's extraordinarily bad. It's almost expected. So.
Do we have a fair relationship between business and industry and versus residential and downtown? And I mean, are we representative that way?
You know, I can't comment on that. I'd have to look at the numbers. From our perspective, that's something that really gets kind of worked out in the comprehensive plan and land use policies and kind of where you want to go with that. So as we study that more, you know, for us, it's really, at zoning, you're really starting to get down to the rules and what's on the ground and kind of what you want the ground to become. So that's, I couldn't answer that question one way or another, really.
City zoning needs to somehow be integrated with county zoning to some degree or another. How does that get accomplished?
It doesn't.
It doesn't.
Two separate bodies. Unless you're Shreveport, Louisiana, in which they don't even ask about that, because that is its own mess. But it's two separate jurisdictions. Sometimes the city's subdivision regulations can spill over into the county. I don't know what Iowa's extraterritorial jurisdiction is. Ryan, you're nodding.
Yeah, we'll do a review timeline.
For the subdivisions, yeah, but for zoning, it stops at the city boundaries. That's just how the authority is delegated.
Yeah, there's no what they call in other places extraterritorial review, where that becomes a bigger issue. Now, I've worked in a number of places. I can tell you hands down that the best relationship between the county and the city is very good here. But I think where it comes in where it's very different, Scott County has always been known, and this is a positive, is that they have a very straightforward, I want to call it simple zoning ordinance, but it is well geared to a rural type environment. They haven't taken a zoning ordinance off the shelf from a city and trying to convert it into a county zoning ordinance. And Ryan's correct. We will want to make sure that the regulations that we come up with, particularly in our areas that are currently agricultural, and largely, if the comp plan is followed, will remain largely agricultural, as well as we have a lot of industrial on the edges of the city as well. So we'll be looking at that. Good question.
And to build on that question, what's going on with Sterilite, or that area that he's talking about, is they're starting to annex areas out of the county. How does that work with the two separate jurisdictions? How do you deal with that?
Well, once it's annexed in, it becomes the city of Davenport, and then the city has to rezone it to whatever it wants to be, and then it's basically under your jurisdiction. So. Sorry?
Recently, we adopted a land use plan. How is this going to impact the recently adopted land use plan? Or is this going to further define within the land use plan what can be done in these specific areas?
It's our guidance for the districts we want to create and where those districts would go on the map. Zoning is far more specific than a land use plan, so you're going to start to see a lot more nuance pop into, say, a category that says commercial. Now it's going to be a series of commercial districts. And we're going to have to figure out the boundaries.
If I could just add to that, and when our land use plan update was adopted, I tried to include a caveat that if through the zoning process, which is going to be much more intensive than the plan update process, if we saw nuances or issues within the land use plan itself that just plain didn't jive with where this discussion was going, we can always go back and amend the plan again. So, a plan is a living document. It's not just something we open up every 10 years, and if we see some discrepancies there, we'll definitely be looking at it.
Okay. Well, we'd like to again thank you all very much for coming to the meeting. This was our pleasant get to know you meeting. You can come at the other ones and yell at us. So we're ready for that. So, but thank you all and have a good night.